أهلا وسهلا متابعي الجزيرة مباشر في هذه الجولة المتجددة من العاصمة الأمريكية واشنطن. أصحابكم فيها عمرو حسن مع حملة داخل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية للضغط على الكونغرس الأمريكي في ملف اليمن. هذا الضغط سيتم حول محورين أساسيين. المحور الأول هو استئناف المساعدات الإنسانية لليمن المعلقة في هذه الفترة، والمحور الآخر هو وقف الدعم العسكري لقوات التحالف تحديدا للمملكة العربية السعودية فيما يخص حرب اليمن. ما هو الدور الذي يمكن للكونغرس القيام به في هذه المسألة؟ هذا هو سؤال، ولكن سؤال آخر: ما هو دور منظمات المجتمع المدني للقيام بالضغط على الكونغرس حتى يطلع بهذه المهام؟ يساعدنا في فهم هذه المسألة أحد منسقي الحملة التي تتم اليوم على منصات التواصل الاجتماعي وعبر الإنترنت داخل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية للضغط على الكونغرس في ملف اليمن، وهو السيد حسن الطيب. بالتأكيد سنجري هذه المقابلة باللغة الإنجليزية، لكن تصل حضراتكم مترجمة للغة العربية. حسن طيب, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hassan, if we can please start by elaborating more, what is the nature of this campaign? What are the goals? What are you guys aiming to do?
Yeah, thank you again for having me on to chat about our National Day of Action for Yemen. Today, this morning, our 110 plus coalition, we sent a letter to Congress urging that they restore congressionally appropriated USAID funding to Yemen that has been suspended, because we think it's so important that the US do its part to make sure Yemen can beat COVID-19, considering that we have been complicit in the Saudi-led war on Yemen through the destruction of hospitals, through Saudi bombings, through supporting the air campaign and the blockade, just by nature of us being complicit to the coalition. And furthermore, we're asking people around the country to amplify the message by doing videos and posting them on social media and contacting their representatives, amplifying this message of restoring the aid and ending the weapons sales and ending U.S. military support for the war. And Congress has a chance to do this very soon. The Malinowski Amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual Pentagon spending bill, is about to get voted on next week. And there is a provision that potentially could get attached to that. It would be a 1-year prohibition on weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So that is, in a sense, what our campaign is all about.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned the National Defense Act, because this was my next question. Do you believe in the intentions? I do believe that there have been so many amendments produced to the bill. However, still the spending bill exceeds $740 billion. This clearly reflects an intention to continue the nonstop wars waged by the US. That's A. And B, do you believe that even the Democrats, even in the House, have the intention to withhold the approval or the vote on this bill and kind of condition this to stopping the war in Yemen in specific?
I never give up, and I am constantly trying to build movements and build people power to make sure that Congress knows that their constituents think that the war in Yemen is unacceptable. That said, it's going to be a difficult lift this year during an election, during an election year. It's a presidential election year at that. And, so it's going to be very difficult, but we definitely need to show that the House of Representatives, led by Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats, don't want war with Yemen. We don't want to be complicit in a war with Yemen. So we're thinking that, this could, one, potentially influence a possible Biden administration in the future. We think it's going to put pressure on the Saudi coalition, because they can see the polls as we can that Trump may not be in office much longer. And if they think that the Democrats are united around ending military support for the war in Yemen, restoring humanitarian funding, and ending weapon sales to the coalition, I think that sends a strong signal, and it's the vehicle that we have to act on right now.
So, speaking of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, isn't Nancy Pelosi the person who appointed the head of the Armed Services Committee in the House, Adam Smith, not to be confused by Adam Schiff? But Adam Smith himself has a very long history with supporting these military actions and interventions in the U.S. Do you believe that he believes in the necessity of ending the war in Yemen? Have you been in contact with him through your work of advocating for the case?
So I have been in contact with him and his office. One, I should say that the Congress votes. Granted, the Speaker has a lot of influence on who the chairman is, but the Congress ultimately does have a say. So the whole caucus does have a say in that decision. Now, I do think that Chairman Smith does want to end U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. He's voted a number of times to do so. That said, he had to be convinced, and there's been a lot of people power, action and direct action and lobbying that has gone into that. It wasn't easy, but I do think he's on board with that. Will he basically sabotage the NDAA to make that happen? I don't think so. So we have a lot more work to do to build our movement, to build our people power, and that's why this National Day of Action is so important. We have people all over the U.S., again, 110 plus organizations, national, anywhere from Bread for the World, Move On, Indivisible, Foreign Policy for America, Win Without War, Demand Progress, Yemeni Alliance Committee, Yemen Relief Reconstruction Foundation, the Friends Committee on National Legislation. These are pretty large orgs representing tens of millions of people around the U.S., and we're doing everything we can to make our message heard.
Hassan, while you are talking to us, I just want to show this statistic from the official website of USAID. And here, you can easily see, I'm not sure if you can see it, but the viewers can, the drop in the US aid delivered between 2019 to 2020 to Yemen. Why do you believe that the US has taken this position?
It's definitely unfortunate. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. 80% of Yemen's population is immune-compromised. 50% of its healthcare facilities have been destroyed or closed by the war. And the U.S. has been complicit in the bombings of at least 70 hospitals by Saudi warplanes. So it's indeed tragic. Now, the administration is saying that they're suspending $73 million of congressionally appropriated USAID monies to North Yemen because of Houthi obstruction. And that, to us, is unacceptable to do a blanket suspension when so many innocent people are going to feel the burden of that. And it's not going to necessarily be Houthi officials and commanders that feel the burden. Also, the international community has worked with the Houthis to secure a rollback of a 2% proposed tax on humanitarian imports and biometric accountability measures to prevent fraud and abuse. I see this beyond that, though. I think that this is part of a larger campaign by the Trump administration to, just end humanitarian assistance and engagement with the world at large. And you're seeing the rollback of UN funding, WHO funding, World Food Program funding. So this is part of a larger trend. And I also, one last point is I think it's part of the maximum pressure campaign on Iran to try to pressure Iran and its proxies in the region.
So, since you've mentioned the Houthis, I do believe that even the Houthis themselves do not necessarily agree that they need the U.S. aid. As a matter of fact, they consider that as a vehicle to support the other side with military support. Let me play this clip from the spokesperson of the Houthis, and we'll get back to comment on it, please.
تجعل الجيش واللجان الشعبية لتكون دليلا على قبح الإدارة الأمريكية وعلى ادعاءاتها وزيفها التي تدعي الديمقراطية وتدعي حقوق الإنسان، وهي من تقتل الإنسان بكل هذه الأسلحة الظاهرة أمامنا. هذه الأسلحة مجموعة من قذائف مدفع هوزر عيار 105 وقذائف مدفعية أيضا عيار 57. وهي واضحة أمامنا ويظهر أمامنا الشعار للوكالة الأمريكية.
Now, in this clip that was played in Arabic, the official spokesperson of the Houthis last week claimed that the U.S. aid was basically a vehicle to arm the other side. So he was showing in this clip, I'm sure that you weren't able to see it, some of these artillery. So on the other side, it's not only the U.S. that does not want the continuation of the humanitarian support, but even the Houthis themselves claim that this aid is basically a vehicle for these arms. How do you respond to that, and how do you work with both sides refusing to continue these channels, or open them rather?
So I don't claim to speak for these. I don't claim to speak for Yemen. What I am is an advocate inside the U.S. that wants to see, 14 million people on the brink of famine not be on the brink of famine. I'd like to see that people struggling with COVID-19 have access to medicine and supplies. I do think that the U.S. must also work to end our military complicity in the war, and that's equally as important, and that's why that's a huge part of our day of action, because we want to end weapons sales, we want to end logistical support, intelligence sharing, spare parts transfers that keep these Saudi warplanes in the air. And so, I think it's really important that people of Yemen have access to the critical care that they need. And it's clear that there's so much suffering, and it breaks our hearts over here, and we want to do everything we can to help. And a diplomatic solution needs to be reached so trust can be built. And part of that trust being built, again, means that the U.S. has to end its military complicity in the war. But it doesn't mean we should stop trying to get medicine and food to the people that need it most.
And I'm glad that you're talking about the kind of narrative here in the U.S. about the war in Yemen. I believe that neither sides, nor Democrats or Republicans, agree that the continuation of the war is in the benefit of the taxpayers, let alone the world. So how are you planning to work with this, bearing in mind that we have elections in less than 5 months, and there is a possibility that either Joe Biden or Trump is going to win? Do you see that there is a common ground for the non-interventionism between the right and the left, and through which you can find a platform to advocate to end the war in Yemen?
So I'm glad you asked that question. And we have been able to build bipartisan, bicameral majorities in the House and Senate to end U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen. Been able to pass it through the House and Senate with Republicans and Democrats and independents working together on this issue. We have a majority. We know it's there. I think it has influenced the situation. Obviously, nowhere near to the levels we need to, but we have built a movement to do this. And I think with a potential Biden administration, you're going to see some major changes between the U.S. and the Saudi alliance, and there's a coalition and a movement ready to hold the Biden administration accountable. With the Trump administration, it's going to be a lot more difficult, I believe, to have that accountability in place. He seems to be indifferent to the fact that this is, one, an unauthorized war, two, a war that makes us complicit in the world's worst humanitarian crisis on the planet. And so that's another conversation. We are doing everything we can to reach out to Republicans, to reach out to Democrats alike, and try to build more and more support for the war. Again, we have another chance in the National Defense Authorization Act with the Malinowski Amendment to end weapons sales to the coalition. I will also say that Representative Karna's amendment to end U.S. logistical support and spare parts to the coalition is already in there. That's already in FY 2021 NDAA, and so that will have to be negotiated through conference and do everything we can to keep that in the final bill as well. So we've got a lot of work to do, and a lot of people that care about this, and a growing number of people that care about this. So if I were Saudi Arabia, if I were sitting there right now and in the leadership of Saudi Arabia, I would be, looking at options very seriously on how to end support for the war and basically to end the war as soon as possible, because the U.S.-Saudi alliance is in jeopardy.
And I have to mention that you've done an exquisite job with the War Powers Resolution when you and your groups have granted not only the House but also the Senate to approve this bill until it was vetoed by President Trump. So do you believe that for the next round there is a possibility to possibly get the 2/3 of the Senate to override the veto?
It's certainly a possibility. I never want to rule that out. We have a little bit of work to do, that's for sure. We also have elections coming up in November, and it's possible that we're going to be looking at an entirely new Congress. Democrats are favored to win the House and Senate and the presidency. I mean, we'll see if that happens, but if that's the case, I think there will be definitely the votes there to end support for the war and weapon sales and to restore aid to Yemen.
And definitely, we all hope to end this catastrophe, the worst human-made catastrophe, according to the UN. Thank you so much, Hassan Taib. You have a lot of work to do today. Good luck with your campaign, and we'd love to see you again on Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing and highlighting this important issue.
Thank you so much. والشكر متواصل بالتأكيد لكل متابعي الجزيرة مباشر. كنا معكم في هذه الجولة من العاصمة الأمريكية واشنطن، وبالتأكيد لنا جولات متتالية. كنت معكم عمرو حسن، وإلى لقاء قريب بإذن الله تعالى.